So we'll do that, and then we'll wrap up for the night. So everyone's giving great talks tonight on teaching you things about Angular. Mine is less of a teaching and more of a announcement. All right. So my name is Michi DeWitt. I think I said that earlier, though I do have a tendency to forget to introduce myself at Meetup. So in case I didn't do that before, my name is Michi DeWitt. I'm one of the co-directors for WWCode San Diego, and also one of the organizers for Angular San Diego. And tonight I'm going to be giving a brief talk about Protractor because the end is near. So first, what is Protractor? Let's just set the stage in case anyone isn't aware. It's an end-to-end testing framework that is packaged with the Angular project, with the CLI. It was originally designed for Angular JS, but then when Angular came out later, they moved it over so you could also use it with Angular as well. It's built by the Angular team and also maintained by them as well as some other open source contributors. And it builds on top of Selenium WebDriver. It makes extensive use of control flow, and this is going to become important later. But the important thing to know is it's a really common end-to-end testing framework. So you can do things, like run your tests that will, click on inputs and type something in. So like maybe you want to automate your login page, right? It will click on the username, it'll add in some text there, click on the password, add in some text, then click on the button. So, just your standard end-to-end testing. But definitely when it came out back in the day, it was really useful. It's still really useful today, but especially then because it uses Selenium, which is a really popular framework, especially back in 2013 when this was built. But it gives all these Angular wrappers to make it really easy to use with Angular applications. So what is happening? So at the beginning of April, I saw there was a new RFC from Angular called The Future of Angular E2E and Plans for Protractor. So then I clicked in, I saw this. The Angular team is planning to end development of Protractor at the end of 2022 in conjunction with Angular version 15. So immediately, this was my reaction because we do use Protractor at work. So I first wanted to know what was going on. So I dived into the RFC, looked through all the comments, and I'm here to present you the information. So you don't have to if you don't want to. All right, so what are the problems? Why are they talking about doing this? So first, as I mentioned, Protractor was originally written for AngularJS. So it still has a lot of AngularJS specific features and code in its code base, which are soon to be obsolete because AngularJS has also reached an end of life, though it is supported by non-Angular people, third-party teams. The other thing is that, again, Protractor was originally written in 2013, and when it was written, there were no WebDriver API standards. So as the standards evolved, as we got those WebDriver API standards, Protractor wasn't always able to keep up with those changes. And so in order to update Protractor to be up to date with modern JavaScript, the Angular team would need to do a lot of breaking changes. Some of the most important ones are it would need to drop control flow in favor of async await. Async await is probably something that we're all pretty familiar with at this point, but it's actually something that's not well supported in Protractor, just again because of the time that Protractor was originally created. Selenium WebDriver actually dropped support of control flow in Selenium WebDriver 4, which means that Protractor has actually been stuck on an older version for a while now. So that would be the first thing is it would need to drop control flow. That's a big change, a lot of breaking changes there. It's also using a lot of legacy tools like Q instead of promises, the ES6 promises and Jasmine WD2. And the other thing is that, like I said, it has a lot of AngularJS features that are really just dead code and they'd want to remove those, but removing those are all breaking changes. So the Angular team looked at that and realized like, all right, if we update this is going to be a huge effort for all of our developers to get us to a modern version of Protractor. So then the Angular team got together and said, we have a problem. Like, what are we going to do about this? Like, what is the next right step? So what they did is they put out a survey. They got some information from the community. They want to see what everyone is using. This survey is getting data specifically from people that are using Angular in an enterprise application. And they want to see what testing tools they're using. You can see overwhelmingly, people have actually moved to Cypress and have moved off of Protractor in a lot of cases. Um, Again, this is focused on enterprise, with a couple other testing frameworks having a pretty good market share, but Cypress being the big one. So the Angular team kind of got together and decided that instead of trying to update Protractor to have all these major to be up to date with the modern JavaScript and the modern APIs, uh, it just wasn't worth it to make all those breaking changes and to do that to the community, especially because there's a lot of great other testing frameworks out there, and there's really no guarantee that even after making all those changes to Protractor, that Protractor would necessarily be better than something like Cypress, like Playwright, or like WebDriver IO. So they decided that the best thing for the community was to help the community move off of Protractor and deprecate it. So they sent out this timeline, which is May 2021. Their plan is to do the official announcement for the deprecation. The new Angular CLI will no longer include Protractor for new projects. As I mentioned before, Protractor is the built-in end-to-end testing framework that you get if you create a new Angular application. They'll have a new warning for anyone that is using Protractor still, so they know that it's being deprecated. And then going forward from May 2021, they're going to stop doing new feature development on Protractor, and really just fix security issues or browser related bugs that would make it so Protractor cannot run at all. And then looking future forward to Angular version 15, again, the end of 2022, they would stop development on Protractor completely. So that's a lot of information. So that now the community is looking together. What do we do now? What are our next steps? So there's a couple things you can do. First, for new projects, just don't use Protractor. It's still around today, but definitely suggest that you use a different testing framework. In going forward, it sounds like right now they're actually not going to include an end-to-end testing framework with Angular anymore. To be honest, that was a little bit surprising to me. I thought they would make Protractor make Cypress the default. But now there'll be no default one, so teams will have the ability to choose what the best testing framework is for their situation. And the reasoning for that is that every team has different end-to-end testing situations, and so Cypress works for a lot of people, but it might not work for your team. And so they just wanted to, instead of giving an opinionated answer, they're going to let you choose your own. But I do recommend you try Cypress. I think that's what our team is looking at moving towards. It really does look like it's poised to become the new de facto standard in Angular projects. In fact, NX, which is a great tool from Narwhal, has been using Cypress as the default end-to-end testing framework for a while now. Though it is worth noting that there are a couple trade-offs with Cypress that may make it not the right tool for some people. So it's definitely worth looking at the guide and being aware of that decision before you make it. But what if you already have an Angular project, you're already using Protractor, what do? You have a couple, again, you have a couple options here. So one, you can migrate over to Cypress from Protractor. The Angular team is working directly with the Cypress team to provide as clean a migration as possible using the Angular CLI. And NX has had a migration guide from Protractor to Cypress for a while, because again, if you're using NX, they suggest they use Cypress. So migrating from Protractor to Cypress is not a completely new thing. It's something that a lot of people in the community have been doing already. One other option is to migrate to WebDriver IO. And it looks like the WebDriver IO team has already added tools to help you transition really easily over from Protractor to WebDriver IO. So if you have any questions about that, I added a link to their comment in that RFC with like their list of what you need to do. It does look like there's going to be an option, a third option, to pay for long-term support. Much like if you were on AngularJS, when the Angular team deprecated support for AngularJS, some people like XLTS stepped up and offered some paid support versions for AngularJS for people that just weren't able to move off for one reason or another to Angular. It looks like that will also be the option for Protractor. So you can be able to pay for some long-term support, or you can, this is the option 4, you can move to a different testing framework. There's a lot of other great ones out there. WebDriver IO and Cypress aren't the only ones. Playwright was getting a lot of mentions in that RFC as a good one. That one is backed by Microsoft. So if you feel more comfortable with a framework that's backed by a big company, Playwright might be a good one to look at. Nope, sorry. I don't know why I'm having issues today. Okay, so that's a lot to process. The good thing here is that nothing is set in stone until the end of 2022, right? So you have, a year and a half before anything is really finalized. So that means that your team, if you're using Protractor, you have time to figure out what the best decision is for you. And the other thing to be aware of is that this RFC was to get feedback from the community on what the right decision was. Was deprecating Protractor the right thing to do? Is this timeline the right timeline to have? And they've said that they're going to add a comment on the RFC about what their official next steps are. So, definitely if this is something that's going to affect you, keep an eye on that RFC to see what they've officially decided. Because everything that I've shown today is what their proposed plan is, but I think not their official plan yet. And the other thing I want to mention is that, this is a big change. And, I think Protractor in the last couple of years, it has gotten a little harder to use than it was originally. But at the end of the day, Protractor's been a really great tool. So definitely want to thank the Protractor team for all the work they put in supporting it and maintaining it for the last almost a decade, right? It's been like 8 years. It has been a tool. It's really made doing end-to-end testing for Angular incredibly easy. So I do think it's important to give them the shout out that they deserve. It's it's the end of an era. It's natural that things come to an end, but it's been really nice having them. And that's all I have for you today for my talk. You can follow me on Twitter at Michi. I made that Twitter before I thought I would need to say it out loud. I also blog every once in a while with the ngconf champions, so you can look at my blog post on medium.com. Same username I have on Twitter. And yeah, that's all I have for you. So I'll pause. Are there any questions that I can possibly answer about Protractor?
Michi, the only question that came up in the chat, if you have a concise answer for this, is what is async await?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So async await, it's a new standard that they came out with in ES6, which allows you to handle asynchronous code in a more synchronous fashion. So it was you can do that combined with promises. Like if you're, for example, fetching data from a server, right? Before you would use before async await, you could use a library like Q, like we mentioned before, to do promises, or you could do, or just promises in general. You get the data, and then you can do like promise dot then, and then whenever the data comes in, you execute a callback, but the function that made the request to the server continues. Using something like async await, you can actually have your function sit there and wait for the request to come back, and then continue on once the data comes back. So again, just kind of making asynchronous data and asynchronous code handled in a more synchronous fashion. I'm sure you can find some really great blog posts and stuff about that explain it a little bit better than I just did.
So what was before async await? What did people use instead of async await before ES6?
I mean, there are a lot of like promise libraries like Q that you could use to handle that. And I think for the most part, it's just like using different callbacks. I will be honest with you that I used Q before that. And then async await came out not too long after I moved from Java development to JavaScript. So I wasn't here in the days before that to give you a better answer on that one. Sorry.
What is like the underlying problem or symptom that you have if you don't use, if everything is synchronous? How would you experience that? Or
well, so I think really you're only going to have asynchronous code if you're dealing with like requesting data from a different server for the most part, right? I guess that's not the only time, but that's the most common situation. But if you're just doing something like clicking around in your application, a lot of that will often be like you'll execute a function, and that function will just be synchronous.
Okay.
Unless you're doing something like ArcJS and firing observables.
I'm just curious if there was no async or Q library or promises,
I believe it was just a lot of callbacks that would get executed whenever.
And it's also a way, if you're looking at all those callbacks in your code, it's very, very difficult to look at it and